All right, guys. So there's a something that's just been chafing my soul recently, and so we need to talk about it. And this is probably going to end up being a pretty controversial video, but it is what it is. One of my other videos on my channel is about how Israel's going to return to her ancestral boundaries, and I actually put a little disclaimer note on there and pinned it saying this video is kind of under review right now. Um, I need to reevaluate it and double check and see what I said in that video, because while I stand by the idea that God will rebuild His Zion, I've come to the conclusion over the last couple years that maybe that physical government that's over there in Israel right now isn't God's Zion, because it was the Rothschilds operating from the UK that basically created that in the first place. And then we have this letter from Pike, which is really interesting, how World War III is going to be Islam versus political Zionism, and they're going to be smashed together and destroyed, and how the other world wars were about pulling these political Zionists out of all the nations of the world where they were scattered back to a geographic location so that they would be easier to destroy. Um, and then just as I've been studying Bible prophecy, I've seen all manner of interesting things in the scriptures. How the leaders of the Jewish people are these corrupt prophets, and while you have the flock of Israel trying to drink water from the stream and stuff, these filthy leaders of the flocks are going in and they're fouling up the waters for everybody else. And some of this stuff that I'm seeing in the prophets is literally what we're seeing in this modern Zio state of Israel. They're always, rubbing our faces in with the Nazis and World War II and so forth, but then a lot of the behaviors, victimhood is powerful. I've talked about this before. There's two special victim classes that they were victimized in the past, and so there's this subliminal messaging that we're force-fed that these groups that have been victimized in the past, they are above scrutiny in the present. And those two groups are Jews and blacks. Blacks were slaves, therefore we can't criticize anything because they were historically victims. We can't criticize anything that they're doing. That would be racist. That would be, whatever. And then the Jews, they were victimized during World War II, we're told, by the Nazis, and therefore we can't criticize anything that they're doing in the modern era because that would be anti-Semitic. Interesting. Victimhood is powerful. But the problem is modern Israel is doing terrible things, and things that the Nazis would have done. They basically are the Nazis in the world now, in their region of the world, and it's getting pretty weird, folks. Now, let's be clear about something. There are no good guys, so I'm not going to say that Hezbollah are the good guys. I'm not going to say that the mullahs and the leadership of Iran are good guys. They most definitely are not. A lot of these countries are just run by bad guys across the board, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that Israel and America are the good guys. There's some terrible things going on. And I'm going to give you, the stuff going on in Gaza, where some of the numbers are coming out of that now. 700,000 men, women, and children killed, I think, is one of the statistics I saw recently, and 83% of those were women and children. That's pretty appalling, right? If Israel's fighting a legitimate war, why are 83% of the casualties women and children? Now, we do live in an age of propaganda. Maybe the sources that I'm seeing are tainted and none of that information's correct, but the reality is every once in a while we see some pretty atrocious things. I actually was going to dig up the video and show it, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, so I'm going to describe something that gave me pause the other day. A group of Israeli soldiers, about 3 or 4, shot a 14-year-old boy. Now, I don't know when this happened, whether it was recent or whether it was... it was within the last several years, so fairly recent, but whether it was recent as in the last few weeks or not, I don't know, but I saw the video in the last few weeks, alright? So they shoot this boy. He's lying in the street, and one of the soldiers goes and places some rocks by him to make it look like he was throwing rocks at the soldiers to justify the shooting in the first place. And then they're all standing around looking at him as he's lying there in pain on the pavement, bleeding out. And then medics come to the scene, and they would have saved the kid's life, but the soldiers prevent them from doing that. And he dies. How does that make you feel? So here's the thing. Regardless of whether Israel's war against Islam is righteous and all this other stuff, that doesn't put evil deeds like this specific murder of a child by Israeli soldiers, that doesn't put that above all scrutiny. You see what I'm saying? If we, regardless of, what else is going on, we still need to have, to be a voice of reason, to be a voice of morality, and say that some of this stuff is not acceptable. So here's another thing that happened. An American young woman, I forget if she was in her early 20s or her late teens, she was on a missions trip to Israel with a church group. I think they were doing the usual things, maybe like I've been on missions trips where part of it was doing building projects and stuff like that. Or I was on a missions trip where, service in the community, helping with various community type charity work or doing building projects and stuff. I've been part of churches that have done that kind of thing, and I've been on a missions trip myself once to Brazil. And so her church group was in Israel doing that kind of thing. And they were in an area where there were Palestinian Christians. And understand that during the settlement process, sometimes, these areas are opened up for settlement, and that means that they just go in and they destroy the homes of the people who are living there. Some of them are Christians, by the way, and just drive them out sometimes, or even kill them. And in this case, this is what happened. This young woman was there, and the Israeli military came in with heavy equipment, bulldozers, and they were just going to plow under some of these people's houses. And so this young woman stood between a bulldozer and a house, trying to keep them from plowing it under, and they just ran right over her. And she died, sobbing in agony and bleeding from her nose, mouth, eyes, and ears. And that's Israel. They're ruthless. And what they did in murdering this young woman was also a crime. Stories like these, I hear all the apologists yammering, well, this is a holy war, and, we need to support Israel in whatever it is they want to be doing. And the problem with that is Israel is not a righteous nation. They've assumed many of the evils of the West. Fornication, homosexuality. Tel Aviv is proud that it's the gayest city in the world. That's an affront to God. Abortion, and the things that the government is doing are on par with some of the things that the Nazis were doing. We are talking about genocide. And this little video that I have here is interesting. What exactly is Israel's goal? And he actually proves it. And the Israelis prove it themselves. Anyway, let's just let this speak for itself.
It seems like just about everything we do, they have influence over.
More than we would think. Once you start to see it, you notice it. Once you start to notice, then you're like, but this is everywhere.
What is the goal?
The greater Israel. The Israelis have this idea of manifest destiny. Their idea is pretty much all of Palestine, about half of Lebanon, about half of Syria, all of Jordan, and a great swath of Saudi Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia. Now you would think that seems pretty ambitious. Look at an Israeli uniform right now. They have a symbol of what they call the Greater Israel, which is everything I just told you. That's what their vision is. That's what they want.
Why? Why do they want those specific regions?
They believe that that is their God-given land.
It seems.
So understand something. Let's go back and look at that patch, because he's exactly right. It's right there. It is right there. So here you have the so-called Sinai Peninsula. Now we know that the Mount Sinai there is not the real one. The real Mount Sinai is over here in Saudi Arabia. But it's on Israel's military patches. That's pretty wild, isn't it? Pretty wild, this greater Israel. And by the way, what's going on in Ukraine? Zelensky's Jew. He's a Jew, or a crypto Jew, or whatever you want to call him. And he is almost certainly someone who was groomed by the intelligence services, the U.S. CIA, and put in that position. He was a political science major in university, and then it was like someone began whispering in his ear, hey, if you want to be... They groomed him for power, basically. Then he became an actor, comedian, and so he's on this show called Servant of the People, hugely popular in Ukraine, and he's playing the role of president of Ukraine. And then eventually he runs for president on a political party ticket, the political party being called Servant of the People, hearkening back to that comedy show, and he wins, and now he is actually president. It just shows how they use propaganda and things like that, and stupid people let their minds be influenced by entertainment. And he almost certainly has Western intelligence, and by Western intelligence we're talking, UK, US, and Mossad, because Israel functionally is a Western creation, the Balfour Agreement and the Rothschilds and all that operating out of the UK. But the greater Israel thing also includes Ukraine. Ukraine's some of the most fertile land in Europe. It may actually be the most fertile land. I think it's the breadbasket of Europe. They have tons of mineral resources and stuff as well. And what's going on in Ukraine is a war where the country's being depopulated. And I saw a paper. It was an extensive and elaborate paper, and I wish I could remember where I saw it, but it was astounding. It was about how Ukraine is going to be basically annexed by Israel. And they envisioned this. This is wild. They envisioned using the Ukrainians as a low intelligence labor class. And then Israeli intellectual elites will basically oversee and utilize them. And this paper was detailed. It had details about things like they're going to bring back advanced technology from the old world, including airships, and they'll have clean airship travel between Ukraine and Israel, and it incredibly detailed document. And I forget where I found it. It wasn't just speculative or nonsense. It was on a credible website and written by credible and connected people, which is what made it so interesting. But we've talked about this too, this symbol here. Now, whether this is the Star of Remphan that's mentioned in the Bible or not, which is the star associated with the worship of a false god, I don't know. It could well be. We don't know because the Bible doesn't draw a Star of Remphan for us. So whether the Star of Remphan is a 6-pointed star or a 5-pointed pentagram, I don't really know. But it is very possible that this is the Star of Remphan, associated with the worship of a false god, but it's definitely not the Star of David. It has more of an association with Solomon than anything, and by which I mean Solomon later in his life, when he was seduced by his wives and began getting involved in all this pagan worship, including dabbling with demons. In Eastern traditions, they credit, like the Arabian Nights and stuff, they credit Solomon with having, he was the wisest man who ever lived. These sources credit him with having a great power over the demonic realm, where he was able to summon demons and bend them to his will, and they were in terror of him because of his occult knowledge and power. Obviously, that's Solomon at the end of his life when he had turned away from the true God of heaven. But this symbol's really interesting. Ask yourself, how many points on this star? Well, there's 6. How many small equilateral triangles? Well, there's 6. Remove those small equilateral triangles, and how many sides are left in this central shape? Well, there's 6. This is the occult representation of the 666. That's what this is. I have no idea when exactly it was adopted to represent political Zionism, But it's not just used by political Zionism, just like the swastika wasn't just used by Nazi Germany. This symbol, interestingly enough, is tied to Freemasonry. It's tied to witchcraft and Satanism and mystery schools. The 666 is a sacred number in a lot of these, in numerology, which a lot of these groups are practicing. And I've seen Catholic priests wearing this symbol, and I've seen Muslim clerics wearing this symbol. I do believe this is going to be the symbol of the Unitarian One World religious system that is coming. But what exactly happens between here and there, it's hard to say. What's clear in the scriptures is that Antichrist has sort of an ambivalent relationship with Israel, and then there's going to be a betrayal, and he's actually going to be hunting down the Jews and Christians, I believe, is what we see in the scriptures and prophecy from what I've studied. And it's not hard to see why, because when that sacrifice system, well, let me think about this a little bit. Where do I want to go with this video? There's a lot we can say, and we're going to look at some scripture that is very, very interesting. Let's talk about that sacrifice system. So I do think we're going to see a rebuilt third temple. I believe that the scriptures require it. And here's what I mean when I say that the scriptures require it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So I've talked about this before. There's prerequisites for the rapture. And because some of the things that are laid out in the scriptures, the Christian church of the first century were misconstruing some of these things. Paul writes this: "Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ," so that's talking about his coming, "and by our gathering together unto him," that's the catching away of the saints. This seems to be a reference to, so to be clear, the rapture and the second coming, they are two different events, all right? But anyway, we're clearly talking about those events here. "But we beseech you that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us." Don't take any of these things to mean that the day of Christ is at hand. "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." This is the Antichrist, "who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." So this Antichrist is going to claim to be the supreme being. He's going to claim to be God in a rebuilt temple. And that is a prerequisite, actually, before the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ and before the gathering together of us unto him. And I've talked about this over and over in my videos. This pre-tribulation deception, that's what it is, that we're all going to be out of here before anything really gets difficult. That's just not what the Bible teaches. There are things to endure. But the rebuilt temple, it's going to happen. And they have the lineage of the ashes of the red heifers. And the red heifer ceremony was done at least twice last year. Maybe more. And, it's hard to say. There's some people still saying, well, it was a trial run. There were actually two different dates reported, which is why I say I think it was done at least twice. But certainly at least once, we know that, because we have footage from. But like I said, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, there are multiple dates that were reported for these red heifer ceremonies. While there's great debate over those, some saying it was just a warm-up or a rehearsal, there are others saying no, at least one of those ceremonies did completely fulfill all the prerequisites, all of the criteria that they were looking for. And those ashes are used for the purification of the priests. It's not a sacrifice, it's a ceremony. And the ashes of the red heifer are then used for purification And then that's before the priests then go and do the sacrifices. So they're getting ready. They wouldn't be doing the red heifer ceremonies if they weren't getting ready to bring back the priesthood and the sacrifices. And it's very easy to see why Israel is going to sort of get the bad favor of the world when the sacrifices return. We cannot comprehend how bloody and disgusting that system was. And it was that way by intention. It was intended to show people you have all these innocent animals being horrifically slaughtered, rivers of blood. I saw the foundations of probably David's temple. Well, I don't know. So I've talked about this in my videos, that the Temple Mount may actually be Antonia Fortress, and I think that that's the case, and that the temple site was south of that in the city of David. And I saw at one point over a decade ago now an excavation site there where it was just the foundations of one of the temples, and all that it was the bedrock with areas cut into it for hitching posts for animals, for animal pens, and then blood channels. And this is something that people don't think about. You need channels for the blood because it's rivers of blood when you're sacrificing millions of animals. It is going to be horrendous and disgusting. The stench of it, the gore. The world is not going to like to see this in the modern era. They're not going to like to see it at all. But what is Israel trying to accomplish with this? And understand that the rebuilt Third Temple and a return to sacrifice, it is an affront to God, because Jesus Christ is the one only perfect sacrifice and the final sacrifice. No more sacrifices for sins are required. So by building a temple and trying to get back to the Old Testament system, they're really demonstrating that they still are rejecting Jesus. And that's not something that any Christian should have anything to do with. But there are a lot of Christians who want to see the temple rebuilt because it's bringing on the end times. But the thing is, the end times are not going to be pleasant, all right? It's not going to be a good thing. I'm not necessarily in a hurry. Don't get me wrong. I'm ready for the millennial kingdom. I'm ready for my life to be over. There's nothing so great down here in this earth that I want to hang around longer than I have to. I've lived 10 years longer than I wanted to. Let's be clear about that. But there are miles to go and years to go between here and there, and there's a lot to suffer. And the worst period in time, I believe, comes right before the rapture. The worst period in time in all of history to be a Christian is right before the rapture, when the entire world system is hunting Christians down as animals and executing them. And the scripture talks about this time. It's a time when family members betray each other, and people can't trust anyone because of the pressure. And this is why the scriptures say endure to the end to be saved, because if you deny Jesus in front of men under torture or what have you, or to save your miserable life, Jesus says, I will deny you in front of the Father. So enduring is literally going to be a salvation issue of whether you recant your faith or whether you keep your faith unto death, even through torture and suffering. These are hard things to talk about. These are hard things to think about. Most people have no concept of what's coming for us. But what Israel is trying to do, and understand, many of them aren't really necessarily even religious per se. But I guess those that are, they're trying to force God's hand, in a sense. If we can get back to the law and perfectly keep the law, then we can force God to bless us and give us dominion over the Goyim. Well, the problem with that is no one was ever able to keep the law except for Jesus Christ. And that was kind of the point of the law, to demonstrate that God's holiness was absolute and terrible. And no human can approach that standard of holiness. There is no human who is sinlessly perfect, and thus damnation is the only outcome of that. And that was kind of the point. The law demonstrated how sinful we were and that we couldn't save ourselves. God had to intervene and come in the flesh as Jesus Christ to die for sins. He had to do it because we couldn't save ourselves. We'd already been corrupted by sin. That's the entire point. So these Jews who reject Jesus, they missed the plot. They missed it. They missed the Messiah. I've talked about this from the book of Daniel. Daniel makes it clear it was during the time of Rome's dominion on the earth that the Messiah would be sent. So if it wasn't Jesus, the most famous and influential person who has ever lived, then where's your Messiah? You missed him. Now I want to talk about this. Is judgment coming for Israel? Because I've mentioned this in some of my prophecy snippets and other things. There are two gatherings together that God says he is performing. And all through the scriptures, God says he's building a kingdom that's not made with the hands of men. It's something it's a work of God. It's not a human work. And when I look at this government in Israel, it is a corrupt human government being built by human effort. And it is some of the worst humans on earth, the rulers, the Luciferians, the Talmudists. We're going to talk about some of that as we go through the sins of Israel here from Isaiah. But it is a work of human hands. And if you look at some of the things going on in secret in Israel, you cannot come to the conclusion that God is smiling on that nation or that they have his blessing. And they don't. I'm very tired today, so I'm kind of losing the plot a little bit here and there and going off on some rabbit trails. I think I'm hitting most of the high points, but you can probably tell I'm a little scattered and unfocused today. I apologize for that. I just did a few hours of mind-crushing work. But anyway, so we'll talk about the Talmud a little bit as we go through the rest of this video. And in a sense, the temple is an attempt to blackmail God into giving prosperity. And the covenants, that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit. So in the Old Testament, some of the covenants were not conditional. In other words, God was always going to perform them no matter what. Sending the Messiah, not conditional. He was always going to do it. Creating a New Testament, that was always going to happen. Under the Old Testament, the law is external, forced on people from above, via theocracy, and in written on tablets of stone. Under the New Testament, it comes from the inside out via the Holy Spirit and written on tablets of flesh on the heart. That is what happens when we are born again. We are transformed from the inside out. And but then there are other covenants that were conditional. The ones that were not conditional, sending of the Messiah, that was something that God was always going to do. It was always in the plan. He always knew how it was going to work out. And then another one was making the offspring of Abraham innumerable, like the sands of the sea or the stars of the sky. And that has been fulfilled. God has done that as well. Both the physical offspring of Abraham, and he was the father of many nations. You have Ishmaelites, that's your Arab peoples, and then Abraham's sons and grandsons fathered many nations as well. Many nations that still exist to this day. Many peoples. And so his physical descendants, but also his spiritual descendants, which is us, Christians, spiritual descendants of Abraham, were innumerable. And so that's a promise that God fulfilled, and a covenant that he promised, and one that he fulfilled. But then there were conditional covenants as well. And this is where God says to his people, if you do this, then I will do this. And, so if you maintain your pure genetic identity and don't mingle with these pagan peoples around you, if you don't turn away into these false gods, if you keep your heart and follow me faithfully, then I will give you peace. Then I will give you prosperity. Then I will multiply your children, and so forth. Then I will gather you and protect you. Well, the problem was Israel never kept up their end of the bargain. They never did. And it got so bad, their fornication and their wandering and their whorishness, that God eventually just says in the Old Testament, I'm divorcing you. You haven't been a wife, you've been a prostitute, and I'm divorcing you. Israel failed to keep up their end of the conditional covenant, of the conditional covenants, I should say. So I see this temple rebuilding thing as an attempt to sort of blackmail God. They think that they can manipulate God, as in if we keep to the letter of the law, we can achieve the end result, that God has to prosper and bless us. Unfortunately, the way that they're going about it is pretty heinous, and they're doing some pretty terrible things. And Netanyahu has justified some of the atrocities that they're committing by saying that they're just waging war against Amalek. And sorry, Benny, that ship sailed. That ship sailed. Those covenants were broken. It's over and done with. God divorced you. And now there is going to be a restoration at some point, but it's not going to be a restoration that's forced by Israel rebuilding a temple and, trying to make God comply. As the scriptures say, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And you're not going to get God. You can get America and stupid American Christians who don't understand history, don't understand scripture, don't understand right and wrong. You can get stupid Christians to write a blank check for Israel, but you can't get God to write a blank check for Israel. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. Alright, so let's talk about the sins of Israel. I've been reading through the beginnings of Isaiah, and there's some really fascinating stuff there. And there's this section from Isaiah 2 through, well, really beyond Isaiah 4, but from Isaiah 2 to Isaiah 4, just double check this. Yes, the beginning of Isaiah 2 and the end of Isaiah 4, there's kind of these bookends there that deal with the millennial kingdom. And I talked about this in one of my other videos. In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious. This is from Isaiah 4, the very end of it. Well, actually, it's a pretty short chapter, but anyway. Okay. In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for them that are escaped of Israel. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and he that remaineth in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, even every one that is written among the living in Jerusalem. When the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and shall have purged the blood of Jerusalem in the midst thereof by the spirit of judgment, and by the spirit of burning. And the Lord will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion, and upon her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day, and a shining of a flaming fire by night, for upon all the glory shall be a defense. And there shall be a tabernacle for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, and for a place of refuge, and for a covert from storm and from rain. And I talked about this in my one video about, I think it's titled something provocative, like Sky Fortress Zion or something like that. There's this anime I like, Castle in the Sky, and that is basically what New Jerusalem is. It's a flying crystal sky city. And we see in Revelation it comes down out of heaven. And I think this is what is acting as the tent or tabernacle that's casting the shadow in the daytime. It's this New Jerusalem that's hovering over the Old Jerusalem. And, this is the millennial kingdom of Christ on earth. But in order to get there, there does have to be a purging of the sins of the daughters of Zion. and there are some heinous sins going on there in Israel right now. Heinous things. We're going to talk about some of them because they're delineated in this text. Going back to Isaiah 2, this is kind of the other bookend at the beginning. It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills. And I mentioned this in my other video, that I believe the New Jerusalem is a ziggurat shape, so it looks like a giant mountain. And it's going to be higher than all the other mountains and the other hills. It's going to be hovering over Jerusalem, casting this shadow, like a tent casts a shadow. All the nations shall flow into it. And it says right here, in the last days. This is the millennial kingdom, I believe. Many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up into the mountain of the Lord, and the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Okay. So this is the end result, and we see this section is bookended. So at the beginning of chapter 2 and the end of chapter 4, we have a reference to the millennial kingdom and the establishment of this new Jerusalem. This is God's Zion. This isn't earthly Zion, the modern nation of Israel that's hijacking all this biblical language in order to get gullible Christians to write them a blank check for anything they want to do in the Middle East and in the rest of the world. No, this is the true Zion that God is creating, not a work of human hands. But in between these two bookends, we have a description of the reasons why God is going to judge and purge his people. And that's what we're going to go through now and discuss here. And this is why this video is called Is Judgment Coming for Israel? Because her sins are quite heinous. And these are sins that God has judged others for in the past. The saying has been said, and it's very true, if God doesn't judge America, for example, he will have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah, because we are far more wicked than those places ever were. And the same can be said of Israel, which is why in Jerusalem is called spiritual Sodom and Egypt in the New Testament. Okay. Let's dive into it. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east, and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. All right. We're already cooking with fire here, so let's just lay out. They please themselves in the children of strangers. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, we're in a post-Epstein world, and I say post-Epstein, it's post-Epstein disclosure. I do believe that Epstein is alive and well as Ghislaine Maxwell. And my reasoning for that, after doing a deep dive into it, is Epstein had a tattoo. The corpse they took out of that prison did not have a tattoo. And there's a document on the Department of Justice website where it talks about how they are tracking Epstein through his video game accounts, because he's known to play games like, World of Warcraft, Fortnite, Minecraft, these games that tweens are attracted to. And it's pretty obvious why Jeffrey Epstein would be interested in video games like that. And they're tracking these accounts, which are active in Israel. Interesting, really interesting. So is Epstein alive? I think he is. And then there have been various examinations of footage of supposedly this actress playing Ghislaine Maxwell at some of these hearings, and it's very clearly not her. Very clearly not her when you assess pictures and video we have of Maxwell before and this actress in the orange jumpsuit who's pretending to be her or whatever. It's a pretty blatant body double. A lot of people throw around the terminology clones. So to be clear about something, there are clones and there's body doubles, and they're not the same thing. Not at all. A clone is, they take some samples of you and they create another being, and they can accelerate that process pretty well from what I understand. But they make a copy of you that's genetically the same. And that's going to look pretty identical. But in these cases, they're not necessarily doing that. I don't think the human cloning, I suspect, I know that there's efforts to do it, because Epstein was funding a custom clone company in Ukraine. That was something that came out in the Epstein files. But I don't think the technology is quite as good that you can just snap your fingers and have a clone, on short order. I think it does take still a number of years to get that ready, and there's challenges to that. I mean, a clone is still a human being. I believe. Some people may disagree with me on that, but are you really going to? There's elements of the clones are useful, if you're harvesting organs for the original person, because genetically identical to the original person, the donor. But as a body double or fill-in, there's some limitations there. A clone is not necessarily a trained actor or anything like that, and so that's why they do tend to use body doubles, not clones. And so that's an important distinction there. I don't know that I've ever seen a clone stand-in. If they were able to train a clone to behave like a donor, you would really never notice the difference, because a clone is a clone. They're genetically identical. But anyway, that's just a little aside there. But they please themselves and the children of strangers. Yes, this is PDO stuff. And there's another video that I did at one point talking about the story coming out of New York City, where there's a synagogue, and they're building a tunnel network under the synagogue, trying to connect to these ancient, these old ritual baths that have been sealed up. Why? What do they need access to these ritual baths for? And then why are these tunnels full of child mattresses and high chairs? What's going on there? Well, this ties in with the other things that are laid out in this verse. They be replenished from the east, and are soothsayers like the Philistines. Here we go. Talmudic Judaism. This is going to get real dark. Buckle up. So, around the time of Christ, Jesus called the Pharisees and the Sadducees generation of vipers. And that's important. He's saying basically you are the seed of the serpent that is laid out in Genesis. On a spiritual level, you are offspring, and he called them this. They're children of the devil. Why was this? Well, they'd added a lot to the law of God, and also I believe that the Jews absorbed a lot of mystery religion from the captivities, the Babylonian captivities. And we see in the scriptures that Daniel and his friends, they resisted the indoctrination of the Babylonians, but the rest of the captive Jewish children didn't, and they were absorbing this stuff. And they call it the Babylonian Talmud because a lot of it was assembled during the captivities, and a lot of occult material became part of that system of Talmudic Judaism, including the Kabbalah and the Zohar. I'm not tremendously familiar with the Zohar. I'm a little more familiar with the Kabbalah stuff. But they basically rewrote Judaism on some levels. I guess you could call this a Jewish flavor of witchcraft. All right. So what's going on with this stuff? Okay, so at the time of Christ, things were already not good with these Jewish sects. And then obviously they rejected and killed him. And then for 500 years after Jesus, the Talmud continues to be written. And it's being written by these rabbis. This is not scripture. It is actually a system of teaching that contradicts the Old Testament, but they wrapped it around the Old Testament to gatekeep God's law. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the Talmud, there are curses for those who study the Torah unless they're rabbis. So in the Talmud, there are curses for those who study the Torah unless they're the rabbis. And the scriptures, the Old Testament commands, study these things, teach these things to your children. So the Talmud contradicts God's word. Let's just be clear about that. And the Talmud includes other things that are pretty debauched as well. Marriage at age 3. They teach that Mary was a prostitute, which makes sense from a human perspective because they don't believe in the virgin birth. And so the only logical conclusion then is that she was a prostitute. They teach that Jesus was a false Messiah, and I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it. They teach that Jesus is being boiled alive in human excrement in hell for all eternity because he was a false Messiah. I'm not going to type that. I'm just going to say it. But the Talmud teaches that. Talmudic Judaism also practices the oral cleansing of the circumcision wound. And this is not me making this up. I'm going to give you the source. MyJewishLearning.com. I think it's .com. Maybe it's .org. Anyway, My Jewish Learning. This is a Jewish site, and you can find that, yes, they admit that this is something that they do as part of that bris ceremony. It's filthy. This is not, God does not say that that's how you're supposed to do the circumcision in the Old Testament. And how do the Jews get away with doing this PDO crap in civilized societies? This is disgusting. It's filthy. And it's why there is syphilis amongst infants in many communities, especially in New Jersey and New York. Why? Because they're doing this to these babies. Filthy. It's filthy and disgusting. Go look it up for yourself, here or elsewhere. Makes me sick even thinking about it. And then we haven't really even talked about the Kabbalah yet, where there's this guy, this god. The god of the Kabbalah is Ein Sof. And we're not talking the God of the Bible. We're talking the Kabbalistic tree of life. It represents Ein Sof. It has these nodes or sephiroths on it. Each of them is a god or goddess entity in its own right, but it's also an attribute of this god Ein Sof. But understand that this stuff is, this is not the scriptures in the Old Testament and the system that God gave the Jews back in the day. So much has been added to it. And my well-meaning mother, I love her. She's a wonderful lady. She has a lot of discernment, but she has this phrase she uses, and it drives me crazy. Judeo-Christian values. And I tell her, Mom, there's no such thing as Judeo-Christian values. The Jews hate us. They're just using Christians because we're dumb and we're easily manipulated. And proof of this is, Huckabee and Cruz, who were interviewed about all this Israel stuff, and they couldn't substantiate what they believed. They just parroted, we got to support Israel no matter what so that we're not judged by God. Well, guess what? You got to give us more than that. Like, what are we talking about? Because there's ethnic Jews. There's different groups of ethnic Jews. Currently, it's the white Ashkenazi Jews who are at the top of the totem pole in Israel. But there's other groups as well. Some of them are secular. They're not even religious at all. Then there's different flavors of Judaism, just like there's different flavors of Christianity. And the worst is this Talmudic Judaism. That's what all this filth is that we've been talking about here. The blood and sex rituals, the pedophilia. It's from Talmudic Jude. It's from these Kabbalah adjacent systems that talk about. I saw a source where it was talking about the value of human blood sacrifices and how it's a 4-year-old boy is going to be the most potent human sacrifice. And by the way, the Kabbalah in this system is a system of demonology and how to summon demons and how to bend demons to your will. It's Jewish Satanism. Jewish witchcraft is what this stuff is. To be clear, when I say religious Jews, we're not talking about all of them are into this stuff either. There's different sects. And then you have Messianic Jews who they hold to the feasts and stuff like that because it is their culture, it's their heritage. I don't have a problem with that necessarily. Now, I personally am not going to do that because I'm not under the law. I'm a Gentile who's under grace. There's no reason for me to go back under that system and put myself into bondage to the law. And it's not my heritage, it's not my culture. But for Jews who want to keep the feasts and so forth, by all means, do so. And the feasts, there were prophetic things built into the feasts about the life of Jesus and about the end times, I believe. And that's something I want to revisit and look at in more detail at some point in the future. Um, so I'm not saying that all religious Jews are of this flavor, but this is a very real thing, where they're doing some pretty degenerate stuff in some of these circles, the Talmudic Judaism, and they are the antithesis of everything that Christianity represents. There is no Judeo-Christian values. It's a contradiction in terms. Okay. So we talked about this already. They please themselves and the children of strangers. There's numerous interpretations to that we could be talking about. Sexually, Epstein. And Epstein wrote numerous times about how we Goyim are cattle and we exist to be consumed by the superior race. And that justifies, what they were doing. Which, yes, child sacrifice. Yes, eating children. Yes. Okay, let's carry on. Their land also is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end of their treasures. So they're wealthy. Yeah, yeah. Notice this stuff, my specific thing that I'm saying here is this stuff applies to modern Israel, which is really interesting. This is a struggle you always have when you're studying prophecy, because the prophets were given messages for their time and for the end times. And here's kind of my point. Since this section is bookcased by these references to the millennial kingdom, it makes sense that the purging here that's described in these chapters for these sins is something that happens before the millennial kingdom can be ushered in. Do you see the logical, scripturally based reasoning that I'm employing here to get to that understanding? And then we look at these things and they are characteristics of modern Israel, which I think is very interesting. Their land's full of silver and gold, so they're wealthy. Their land also is full of horses, neither is there any end to their chariots. Okay, so they have vehicles of war. Their land is also full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their fingers have made. And the mean man boweth down, the great man humbleth himself, therefore forgive them not. Idolatry is everywhere in the modern world. You might not think so, but think about movie stars, music stars, TV shows. Think of just all the things that people put on a pedestal and worship. Their phones would be another one. These images. You have people who are spending more than half of their day on their phone. They just can't separate themselves. Screen addiction. And I will be honest with you, I'm on my computer quite a lot because I work online, and then I like computers. I'm on the computer probably half the day. It's not a good thing. It really is not. Now, I'm not on my phone much because I hate my phone. If I'm going to be using a screen, I want it to actually be a decent sized screen with a dedicated input device like a keyboard. But anyway, my point being, we got to ask ourselves the question: are we keeping these things in balance and under control in our lives? And maybe I have some work to do personally on that front. The mean man boweth down to these idols, the great man humbleth himself, therefore forgive them not. Enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. Upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan. And so on. Let's skip down a little bit. They shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth, for fear of the Lord, for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. This is already going on. We have congressional testimony of these underground cities and bases that have been constructed, dozens and dozens of them. And undersea bases as well. We have all these UFOs coming up out of the ocean now. It's all human technology. Well, I'll say most of it's human technology. There is this aspect of demon tech that I've talked about before, where demonic entities are giving knowledge to the leaders of this world system, and they're developing technology accordingly. So some of this stuff is maybe demonically inspired technology. Let's continue. The idols he shall utterly abolish. That's important. In that day, a man, okay, A man shall cast his idols of silver, his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the ragged rocks, for fear of the Lord, for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils, for wherein is he to be accounted of? Yeah, we're just dust. Now, pay attention. For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water. The mighty man, the man of war, the judge, the prophet, the prudent, and the ancient, the captain of 50, and the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. That's babies, by the way, not attractive women, in case you're confused by. The people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. So this is the nature of the judgment that God's going to bring. And by the way, when you have a nation that is governed by women and governed by stupid people, that is a judgment of God. To some degree, nations get the leaders that they deserve. I'm just going to put that out there and leave it. And you can do with that what you want. But that is a biblical principle. When a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father, saying, Thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and let this ruin be under thy hand. In that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be a healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing, make me not a ruler of the people. For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. The show of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom, and they hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. This is really interesting. They declare their sin as Sodom, and hide it not. Tel Aviv, proud of being the gayest city in the world, and that is fascinating. Say ye to the righteous that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat of the fruit of their doings. But woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given him. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. Again, a judgment of God. O my people, they which lead thee shall cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. And we see this all through the scriptures, that God's people are ruled over by a minority, a ruling class, that leads them astray, and also exploits and takes advantage of them. And numerous prophets talk about this. The Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people and the princes thereof, for you have eaten up the vineyard, and the spoil of the poor is in your houses. What mean ye that you beat my people to pieces and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord God of hosts? Understand that there's other Christians there in the Holy Land who aren't Israeli citizens. Christians are God's people. God says this, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the widows and the fatherless in their afflictions, and to keep themselves unspotted from the world. So under that standard, that biblical standard there, is Israel righteous? Do they have a pure and undefiled religion in the eyes of God? They do not. As we've seen from the Gaza thing, they've made a lot of widows. They've killed a lot of widows. They've killed a lot of children. They've exploited a lot of widows and children. They've made a lot of widows and children suffer exceedingly. Here they are taking the property of others. They're beating God's people to pieces. They're grinding the faces of the poor. And they certainly aren't unspotted from the world, not when the capital of the nation, Tel Aviv, is touting themselves as the gayest city on earth. Because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. In that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their cauls, and their round tires. And it talks about all these different feminine beauty products, etc. I'm not going to read the whole list. It's quite interesting. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. Her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit upon the ground. In that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach. Interesting. So a depopulation of men to the point that things are in a bad way. This is some thought-provoking stuff. And, like I said, it's hard when you read prophecy to know, are we talking about things that were prophesied for Isaiah's time or for the end times? Because prophets almost always hit on both of those. They were given a message for their time and for the end times. So what are we talking about here? Well, my conclusion here is that we're talking about the end times due to the bookends of the millennial kingdom around this passage we just looked at. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I look at Israel today, and it's not a righteous nation. They're not going in a good direction. And so the question I'm left with then, in light of that, is there a judgment coming for Israel? I suppose time will tell. Have a good one.